Hello everybody, John from the esports department here, and I just wanted to do a cool little video. I had the day off today, I don't have much else to do, and I came up with something that I thought would be kind of interesting for people. It's the kind of research that I usually do, and I thought people might think this was kind of interesting. I want to preface this by saying this is far from an exact science, what we're doing here, far from it, but it is kind of an interesting thing, so I thought I'd make a little video about it. What I've done here is I've gone over four major statistics, and I'm going to go over them one by one, and then put them into, turn them into ratings, so that we can look at the teams in the LPL, since they're on break right now, and kind of get a feel for who we might have been underrating coming into the season, who we might be overrating, who might be overrated or underrated by the books right now. And there's only a couple teams that kind of stick out, but I thought it was worth talking about. So the first stat that I looked at is gold per minute, which in all my videos every day, you're going to see me look over the gold per minute. I think it's an extremely indicative stat. And so we look at the teams and the way that they're rated in gold per minute. There's a few things that stand out. Well, Fun Plus is obviously up top. Fun Plus has had a great season so far. They're looking fantastic. EDG and Top Esports very close to each other, but in a completely second tier, along with probably RNG would probably be included in this tier. But they're all sitting second, third, fourth, but significantly behind Fun Plus Phoenix. After Royal comes Invictus and Team WE, reasonably close to each other. Invictus being this high in gold per minute is very interesting. They don't rate as well when you do the overall metrics, so we'll see where they sort of are coming short in a minute here. But Team WE coming in sixth. This one was kind of a surprise to me. In seventh, Rare Atom. Ahead of BLG, ahead of JDG, ahead of LNG, all teams that are above them in the standings, I believe, or at least BLG's close. Interesting to see them at 18-20. They haven't really had the kind of season that, for me personally, when I've looked at them this season, I haven't been as excited about them, but they're having a pretty good season as far as gold per minute is concerned. Billy comes in at 8th, so if we were doing the playoffs entirely based off of gold per minute, Billy would pick up the last spot, and JDG and LNG would both miss, which I think is kind of interesting. That both these teams, who I think JDG has obviously had an underperformance of a season so far, but I would think most people would say LNG has had a pretty big overperformance this year, but they're coming in all the way down at 10th when it comes to gold per minute. And not very far ahead of 11th, which is Victory 5, and 12th, which is Sunning. All very close to each other when it comes to gold per minute. Sunning, I think, is one of the biggest standout teams when we look over these metrics as far as their rating for this year. You can see all the way down in 13th in the league, below Estar when it comes to combined metrics. And I think that's very interesting. Sunning is still getting a decent amount of respect to the bookmakers. That might be a team we want to target in the second half of the year here. Estar is after Sunning. It's a pretty significant drop-off, about 40 points between Sunning and Estar. Estar and TT about 11 points apart, and then there's a big fall-off to the bottom three teams in the league, OMG, LGD, and Rogue Warriors, almost 71, or almost over 70 points worse than LGD. So Rogue Warriors by far the worst team in the league when it comes to gold per minute so far. This one I didn't think was we would have been looking at these stats every day, so this one isn't maybe as exciting for some people. They're probably already got a pretty good feel for where the GPMs lie from my other videos, or if you've already been looking at this stat. But let's see the other stats I combined it with and where we might get some interesting stuff. So I combined it with three other statistics. The first one, these are all on Oracle's Elixir, and they're Oracle's Elixir metrics, or the second and third one are. And I think they're interesting ones. The first one is early game rating. And so this is supposed to tell us which teams in the league are the best in the early game. And that shows up with Top Esports in first place, WE in second. So WE in second, very interesting. Historically, WE was a team that I considered to be like a very much mid-late team, like third Dragon, fourth Dragon, very strong in those types of situations, team fights around the Baron. But right now they're performing mostly in the early game, which is interesting, better than FPX even. But Top Esports, top of the league so far in early game rating. Down to number 4, EDG, and number 5, Rare Atom. Another team, once again, that I think maybe I wouldn't have thought was this high on the list. But in the early game, Rare Atom doing extremely well. They're 5th in the league. Invictus is in 6th. Royal Never Give Up in 7th. Victory 5 in 8th. I think those are all kind of things you would sort of expect. It is kind of interesting to see JDG all the way down here. Once again, we knew JDG was having a bad season so far, but they are a team who never really struggled in the early game up until this year. This split has been really tough for them. And you can see the early game is part of the reason that they're having big problems. Their early game is all the way down in, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11th. 11th in the league in early game. Not that far ahead of Estar, as an example. Estar only 0.6 points worse in early game rating. Then you go down, continue going OMG, Thunder Talk, LGD, and look at that. All the way down in 16th, Suning. I had kind of predicted this team was going to have a big fall off this split, but it's really worth noting how hard that fall off has been, because if we just looked at, let's say, just look at the LPL standings and such, Suning, they're just 3 and 4 so far. So maybe you wouldn't quite, get the impression that a team that's 3 and 4 so far was performing as poorly on these metrics as they have been. Early game rating 16th in the league, and even in gold per minute they were down at 12th, 13th, somewhere down there. So interesting to see that team like Estar, who's 2 and 6, actually has had better, I believe, better ratings at both, or very close to the same ratings at both, as Suning, who's 3 and 4. Top Esports, who's all the way down here at 3 and 3, has been very close to the top of the metrics. Rare Atom actually is performing score-wise about as well as we would expect from the stats that we're seeing here. Rogue Warriors all the way on the bottom by a lot, same as gold per minute. So Rogue Warriors just by far the worst team in the league so far. The next we go to mid-late rating. So who's good at those third dragon fights that I was touting WE being good at before the season started? EDG performing the best, 4.2 points better than anyone else, the best mid-late rating in the league. Fun Plus in second. So Fun Plus, you're looking at third place in early game rating and second place in mid-late rating. That's a pretty good combination. But here's an interesting one here. JDG, 4th in mid-late rating. So you're looking at a team who's really struggled in the early game, but they are still pulling it together, and it is a significant drop-off between them and 5th place, which is Rare Atom. They have almost double the mid-late rating of Rare Atom, where Fun Plus and EDG actually have about double the mid-late rating of JDG. So EDG and Fun Plus just way better in the mid-late than almost any other team in the league. Royal trying to compete with them, and JDG is climbing the mountain. But it's really been FPX and EDG when it comes to mid-late game. But then we move down, Rare Atom again, right there in 5th. That puts them in 5th in both early game rating and mid-late rating. A good sign for that team. I think we might see a come up from Rare Atom in the second half of the season. I know there's some people in the Discord that were predicting a big season from them, and they haven't really had it so far. But the numbers are showing out well for them. LNG coming in next. Suning, not the worst in mid-late game rating. So they show up all the way up in 7th when it comes to mid-late. A little bit better than teams like Victory 5 and BLG, Estar, the team I was just comparing them to. But here's some important notes right here. Invictus Gaming and Team WE. Very poor mid-late ratings so far. Worse than Estar, worse than BLG, worse than Victory 5. IG and WE just not getting it together in the late game. And it's so surprising for WE especially. Invictus has always been more of an early game focused team. But for WE, very surprised to see them having a real struggle in the mid-late this season. Rogue Warriors, minus 10.1. LGD, minus 10.8. OMG, minus 15.9. And then, Top Esports, 16th in the league in mid-late rating. Definitely worth noting, because there's a reason why this team is showing up so positively in all their other metrics, but is still sitting here, 3 and 3 on the season? 3 and 3 on the season, despite their insane GPM and early game rating. This is why. Top Esports is mid-late rating. They're just not pulling it together in those mid to late game team fights. And sometimes when you see a weak mid-late rating or a weak early game rating, sometimes it can have to do with things like draft as well. If you're drafting all early game champions, then your early game rating might be really good, your mid-late might be bad. Vice versa, if you're drafting to scale, your mid-late rating might be very good. Your early game rating might be kind of bad. There's definitely been some teams that have done things like that, but these are the kind of stats you can look at to try to get a feeling when a matchup comes. Look at an early game rating for a team, a mid-late rating for a team, and then something like goal difference at 15, which we're going to look at in a second. You might be able to get an idea. This is a good way to try to predict upsets. Look for a team that has an advantage somewhere. If you're, let's say, who are some teams? Estar has a decent early game rating, right? Shoot, where'd they go? Estar with a 45. Maybe they're playing up against Sunning. That's an example. You can at least say, even if one team is better at one thing, you can say, okay, maybe I could see an upset coming here because they do have a stronger early game than this other team. Or if you're looking, mid-late, you have a team like, I don't know, LNG playing against Top Esports. You can go, well, at least that you have a reason here as to why this could be an upset. Looking for teams that have an advantage somewhere in the stats. Now, you don't want to just go digging for stats until you find one and then just say, hey, these guys are better than these guys because they're going to win because this. But it is something you want to look at. Where is the advantage coming from? Are they going to win the early game? Are they going to win the mid-late game? Are they going to snowball the game? Are they just better at goal generation, which is what GPM is going to show you? Where are the advantages coming from? And just worth pointing out that Top Esports has had an abysmal mid-late rating so far this season. Worse than Rogue Warriors, worse than LGD, worse than OMG. Better only than Thunder Talk, who's having an abysmal mid-to-late game so far this year. And then looking at goal differential at 15, it's Top Esports right there at the top. 3 out of 4 of the metrics we're looking at, Top Esports is showing up big. The biggest problem is their mid-late rating. They're just getting killed in the mid to late game team fights. FPX showing up in second. They've pretty much been top 2 in every metric we've looked at. EDG has been top 3 in every metric we've looked at, I believe. But then WE showing up again. So WE, that early game rating, and goal differential at 15 is going to go with early game rating. So if they were good at early game rating, they're probably going to be good at goal differential at 15 as well, but still worth looking at. WE just showing out really well in some metrics and not in others. Rare Atom, up there again. They've been, top 5 in all 3 that we've looked at on this side. So worth noting that Rare Atom maybe is having a little bit better of a season than has shown. Victory 5, Invictus, BLG, Royal Never Give Up. Not doing super insanely well at 15 minutes. They're a team who's really coming alive in the last 15 to 20 minutes of a game. LNG as well, but LNG starting to feel like, from the stats we're looking at, maybe a little bit overrated, considering that they're sitting at 4-3 at the moment. So better ratings better record than Invictus, better record than BLG, better record than V5, better record than Top Esports. Or above them for the moment. Top Esports hasn't played their 7th match yet, but better record than a lot of teams. But their stats have not really been impressive in any specific metric. So they're a team that you might look to fall off in the second half of the season a little bit. JDG goal differential of 15, minus 277. Estar next. I think one thing that these stats are really showing is there's been consistent huge drop-offs between Estar and the rest of the bottom of the league. Estar usually is like the ending point. They're like the last not abysmal team before we start to drop off into abysmal numbers in pretty much every rating. So that means maybe when we see Estar get paired up with TT or LGD or Rogue Warriors or somebody like that, maybe this is a team that we're looking to get a good bet in on when they're playing against some of these lower level teams, because they have been significantly better than the lowest level teams at pretty much everything. But look who's down at the bottom again, Sunning. Definitely worth noting, I think, that Sunning's statistics are just abysmal considering where they are in the league, and probably a team we should expect to fall off even more in the future. When you put all those stats together and try to create a rating out of them, this is what I've come up with as far as the teams in the league. Maybe I'll put some numbers here real quick, and then we're going to take a look at something else that could affect these statistics in a second as well. So Rare Atom, actually, according to all the metrics put together, Rare Atom is actually the 4th best team in the league, which is very interesting. Let me finish adding these real quick. JDG all the way down in 10th, LNG in 11th. Probably not something we would really be saying if we were just generally probing people on where these teams belonged in the league. but okay. So FPX up in first, and note the differences in the ratings as well, not just who's in first, who's in second, who's in third, because there's some significant gaps and there's some not so significant gaps between some teams. FPX 2, EDG 2.5, so FPX just slightly better than EDG when all the metrics are put together. Then there's a pretty big drop off before top esports. And that's because there's nobody else who's been as consistently good as FPX and EDG statistically so far this year. TES we saw was one of the worst mid-late rating teams in the game. So despite being competitive with these two and the other metrics, they drop all the way down to a 5.25 because of how bad they are in mid-late. Rare Atom just consistently right around 5th. So it's a big difference in these two teams, even though their ratings are very close. Part of that is because Top Esports is really good at everything except for one thing, and Rare Atom is just good at everything. And kind of the same story for RNG, who's another quarter point behind, followed by WE, who's another quarter point behind. So a pretty tough gapping of quarter points between Top Esports, Rare Atom, RNG, and WE. Then it falls off a full point and a quarter to IG in 7th. So here's, if we have Rare Atom versus IG tomorrow, this is going to make me lean towards probably putting some money in on Rare Atom. Same thing if we had WE versus IG tomorrow. But then we drop down to Victory 5, BLG a quarter point behind, JDG a quarter point behind them, and LNG a quarter point behind that. So we have another grouping here of quarter point jumps. Victory 5 ahead of BLG, ahead of JDG, ahead of LNG. Another one that might be interesting if we had one of those kind of matchups tomorrow. I don't think many people would be interested in being on Victory 5, maybe in any of these matchups. But good, reasonable matchups according to the statistics for Victory 5 there. Then you see the big drop off to Estar, all the way down to 11.75. And Sunning, who's 3/4 of a point worse even than Estar. And then another big drop-off of a 1.5 down to the bottom 4 teams in the league. And I think this is the consensus bottom 4 teams here. I think the real surprise, as we've mentioned a number of times, is Sunning kind of being down here and included in this group. But this is, I think, the unanimous bottom 4 teams in the league. Then we're looking at Sunning, Estar, and a pretty big jump up to LNG and JDG. So it seems like we're probably getting your 8 playoff teams from this pool somewhere, and it's just going to matter which 8 of these 11 end up in the playoff picture. There's one more thing I want to look at, though, which is kind of who has... Sorry, guys. I went ahead and added a visual to what I was trying to say, just to make it a little bit easier to kind of get an obvious look at what's going on here. So looking at who these teams have played so far, I just listed real quick of the bottom 6 teams statistically in the league, how many of them each team has yet to play. So the teams with higher numbers here have easier schedules in the second half of the year. And as you might expect, the majority of teams are at 3 because we're halfway done with the season. So in theory, you've played half of the bottom 6 teams. So you can see there's a lot of teams that are sitting here at 3. Those are teams that are they've had an average schedule so far. These 4 teams at the top have had the hardest schedules so far. So JDG has had the hardest schedule in the league. They still have to play 5 of the bottom 6 teams in the league in the second half of the season. Probably a big come up coming for JDG. Same for WE, Rare Atom, and LNG. So this is kind of interesting because these are all teams that are kind of lumped into a basket for me right now, not just in rating, but like in how they've performed this season. And all teams that are probably going to come up in the second half of the season, in theory. LNG is kind of mixed because their stats kind of tell me that they're going to go down in the second half of the season, but they have had a tougher schedule than average, so maybe those stats are going to balance out a little bit. Then the teams that have had the easiest schedules, the teams that have looked the best for the most part, Victory 5, their stats looked a little bit better than we thought. EDG and FPX, the 2 best stat teams in the league, they've had the easiest schedules as well, so it's worth noting. And then Estar. So Estar kind of interesting because we thought that they were kind of performing above the rest of the bottom tier, but they have had the easiest schedule of the rest of the bottom tier. So maybe they come back down to earth and find themselves falling back in with those other teams more towards the bottom, given that they've had a slightly easier schedule so far. So just a little quick visual there, just to show JDG, LNG, Rare Atom, and WE probably going to have a little bit of a come up in the second half of the season, slightly easier schedules than everybody else. Maybe we see a little bit come back to earth from EDG and FPX, given that they have some tougher schedules coming in the second half of the year. They're at least playing top 11 teams significantly more often than somebody like JDG or one of these three teams. So just a little mini look there at the rest of the season, what we're coming to expect, who might be overvalued or undervalued at the moment halfway through the season, and who has an easier or tougher schedule coming up. If you're in season long, this information can be kind of interesting. If your heavy stacks are from Rare Atom or LNG or WE, maybe you got a good second half of the season coming up for you, or JDG. Like I know I'm heavy on JDG. Maybe I got a better second half of the year coming. If you're on FPX or EDG in heavy stacks, maybe the second half of your season might be a little bit worse this year. So we'll have to see. But I just thought I'd do that. I had a day off today, not much else to do. I thought I'd do a little quick run through of some stats from the LPL and kind of get an idea of where we might be going in the second half of the year. Appreciate you guys, and I'll see you guys again when we're doing LCK games in a couple days. Have a good one, guys.